Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, February 20th, 2025. All right, first thing, just a reminder, this is the last show for the week. I'm skipping tomorrow's show while I'm still here in Florida. But I will be back after the weekend for Monday, and I'll catch you up on anything that we miss. And I'm sure with everything going on, there'll be a lot to catch you up on. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Secretary of Defense Hegseth orders sweeping Pentagon cuts. So the Washington Post reported on Wednesday that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has ordered Pentagon leaders to develop plans to make sweeping cuts to the Defense Department's budget. According to a memo obtained by the Post, Hegseth's order calls for an 8% cut to the Pentagon budget each year for 5 years. The Pentagon budget for 2025 is about $850 billion, and an 8% cut for 5 years would bring it down to roughly $560 billion, a reduction of about $290 billion. So that's a significant cut that we're talking about here. And Hegseth wants the proposed cuts to be drawn up by February 24th, and the memo includes a list of 17 categories that would be exempt from the spending cuts. The Washington Post, they did not publish the full memo. I don't get why they don't do that with things like this. But the report said that the exemptions include operations at the southern border, the modernization of nuclear weapons and missile defense, acquisition of submarines, one-way attack drones, and other munitions. So those are things that they will not cut from. I mean, they mentioned the modernization of nuclear weapons. That's such a huge money project that just cutting that, or at least some elements of it, would really slash the budget. And the Pentagon has also been targeted by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. The Washington Post reported on Tuesday that the Trump administration ordered the Pentagon to hand over a list of its probationary employees with the expectation that many may be fired. And this came as DOGE employees arrived at the Pentagon. The news of the plan to cut the Pentagon budget comes after President Trump suggested that he wanted a major reduction in U.S. military spending, saying that he wanted to cut it in half as part of a deal with Russia and China. So it looks like they are actually pursuing this idea of really reducing the military budget, which is really good to see. The question is, are they really going to roll back the empire? Are we going to see them close bases, pull back from NATO, and things like that, because to make serious cuts, I think it would take steps like that. And I always think it's worth mentioning when we talk about the Pentagon budget and military spending that the Pentagon budget is just kind of a one part of a bigger picture. Winslow Wheeler, who's a veteran defense analyst who's been working in D.C. for a long time on kind of government oversight stuff, he puts together these tables every year. And he found with the NDAA for 2025, which includes the Pentagon budget and a few other billion in military spending, which again is around $850 billion. But the total U.S. military and national security spending for this year is expected to reach $1.77 trillion, according to his numbers. And that factors in military-related spending from other government agencies not funded by the National Defense Authorization Act, such as the Veterans Affairs Department that has a huge budget, Homeland Security. It also includes the national security share of the interest accrued on the U.S. debt and other factors. And the interest on the debt, I mean, that's a big factor here. So hopefully, these cuts happen. And again, I mean, it would take a real rolling back of U.S. military bases and to make serious cuts. All right, so the next one here, Trump says Zelensky is a dictator who has done a terrible job. So on Wednesday, President Trump called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator who has done a terrible job as the two leaders are trading barbs amid renewed U.S. diplomacy with Russia. Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "Think of it, a modestly successful comedian Volodymyr Zelensky talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle," end quote. The post came after Zelensky said Trump was living in a disinformation space in response to his criticism of Ukraine not holding elections and for not reaching a deal with Russia earlier in the war or before the invasion. Zelensky said, quote, "I would like to have more truth with the Trump team," end quote. So Trump also brought up the lack of elections in Ukraine in his post on Truth Social. He said, quote, "On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle, a dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left," end quote. Trump said his administration was currently successfully negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine. U.S. and Russian officials agreed on Tuesday during talks in Saudi Arabia to work to normalize diplomatic relations and toward an end to the war. Trump said, quote, "Biden never tried, Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues," end quote. So Vice President J.D. Vance also took aim at Zelensky over his criticism of President Trump. Vance said, quote, "The idea that Zelensky is going to change the president's mind by bad-mouthing him in public media, everyone who knows the president will tell you that is an atrocious way to deal with this administration," end quote. So really going after Zelensky, kind of pinning all the blame on him, which, he says that Zelensky convinced the U.S. to back him. I think it's the other way around, that the U.S. convinced the Ukrainians and Zelensky to fight, saying, we're going to give you all this money. We're going to fund everything. Don't worry about it. I think it was clear that the U.S. and NATO were very eager for this war to happen, and that, Zelensky, of course, has responsibility because he went along with this plan, even, to fight this disastrous war instead of signing a deal early on. And Trump shares some blame too. He sent the Javelin missiles to Ukraine in his first administration. He sent weapons that Obama refused to send. So that history is important. But hopefully this leads to an end of the war. This leads to the U.S. ending weapon shipments, because as far as I know, the weapons are continuing to be shipped over there, and the fighting continues very heavy along the front lines. All right, so the next one here, Putin says Russia is ready to return to the table to end the Ukraine war. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. President Vladimir Putin celebrated the talks between the U.S. and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia. He's saying that they went very well, and he said Russia was prepared to engage in bringing the war in Ukraine to an end. So Putin lauded the first round of talks between the U.S. and Russia before saying that Moscow is willing to engage with Kiev on ending the war in Ukraine. He said, quote, "Yes, I have been informed. I rate them highly. There are results. In my opinion, we made the first step to restore work in various areas of mutual interests," end quote. On Tuesday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Saudi Arabia. Rubio said the two sides agreed to normalize diplomatic relations and work to end the war in Ukraine. And this is the thing, to end this war, to get U.S.-Russia relations, to ease tensions, it is going to take some serious effort to kind of rebuild any kind of trust between the two sides. And I think that's going to be kind of a big part of this. And Putin explained while U.S. involvement in the talks was required, he was willing to engage with the Ukrainians. He said, quote, "No one is excluding Ukraine. We are not imposing anything on anyone. We are ready. I have already said this 100 times. If they want, please let these negotiations take place, and we will be ready to return to the table for negotiations," end quote. All right, so the next one here, Hamas will free all hostages for a permanent truce. So on Wednesday, Hamas offered to release all remaining Israeli hostages in exchange for a permanent ceasefire and full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Hamas spokesman Hazem Qassem made the offer in a statement outlining the Palestinian group's conditions after a second phase of the ceasefire deal. Qassem said, quote, "We are ready for a second phase in which the prisoners will be exchanged in one go within the criterion of reaching an agreement that leads to a permanent ceasefire and a complete withdrawal from the Strip," end quote. The Times of Israel reported that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's demands for the second phase include Hamas being disarmed and removed from Gaza, which Qassem rejected. Netanyahu also wants the Palestinian Authority not to be involved in Gaza. So he's saying no Hamas and no Palestinian Authority. So Qasem said, quote, the occupation's condition of removing Hamas from the Gaza Strip is a ridiculous psychological war, and the withdrawal or disarmament of the resistance from Gaza is unacceptable, end quote. So Hamas is releasing 6 Israeli hostages on Saturday, twice the amount initially agreed to under the ceasefire deal. Qasem said Hamas was doubling the number of prisoners to be released in response to a request from the mediators and to prove their seriousness in implementing the full agreement. So it seems like now they're saying, we're willing to release all the hostages. They're trying to get Israel to commit to permanent ceasefire and permanent withdrawal. When there's all these signs that that's not what Netanyahu wants, that's not what a lot of other Israelis want. So there's a chance here. I think that, the fact that they're releasing 6 hostages on Saturday instead of 3 as originally planned, I think that they must have been given some kind of guarantee about something other than just Israel letting in the tents and the mobile homes that they said they would do initially. I think there's some sign they got from the mediators that there will be real negotiations on a second phase, or hopefully the ceasefire deal is fully implemented. All right, so the next one here, Israeli minister calls for the forced deportation plan for Gaza. So this article is from Middle East Eye. An Israeli minister has said that removing Palestinians from Gaza would rely on force rather than so-called voluntary migration. Likud communications minister Shlomo Karhi said the scheme called the scheme a deportation plan in an online post on Tuesday, attacking Attorney General Gali Baharev Miara for allegedly demanding a legal review of the plan. So this contradicts previous claims by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Jewish power leader and former government minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who've tried to present what critics condemn as ethnic cleansing as voluntary migration. And this is what you see, this is the narrative that somehow they call it voluntary migration, acting like there would be a choice in the matter when, you see the damage they've done to Gaza. And essentially what they're threatening to do is restart military operations to get everybody to leave. That's not voluntary migration at all. And here you have a Likud minister just saying blatantly that this is, it would be a forced deportation. Ethnic cleansing. All right, so the next one here, the depth of big tech complicity in AI-driven Gaza slaughter. So this article is from Brett Wilkins. Several recent journalistic investigations, including one published Tuesday by the Associated Press, have deepened the understanding of how Israeli forces are using artificial intelligence and cloud computing systems sold by U.S. tech titans for the mass surveillance and killing of Palestinians in Gaza. The AP reporters found that Israel's use of Microsoft and OpenAI technology skyrocketed following Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. So Heidi Klopf, a chief artificial intelligence scientist at AI Now Institute, said, quote, "This is the first confirmation we have gotten that commercial AI models are directly being used in warfare. The implications are enormous for the role of tech in enabling this type of unethical and unlawful warfare going forward," end quote. So according to the AP report, Israel buys advanced AI models from OpenAI and Microsoft's Azure cloud platform. While OpenAI said it has no partnership with the Israeli Defense Forces, in early 2024, the company quietly removed language from its usage policy that prohibited military use of its technology. The AP reporters also found that Google and Amazon provide cloud computing and AI services to the IDF via Project Nimbus, a $1.2 billion contract signed in 2021. Furthermore, the IDF uses Cisco and Dell server farms or data centers. Red Hat, an independent IBM subsidiary, sells cloud computing services to the IDF. Microsoft partner Palantir Technologies also has a strategic partnership with Israel's military. Google told the AP that the company is committed to creating AI that protects people, promotes global growth, and supports national security. However, Google recently removed from its responsible AI principles a commitment to not use AI for the development of technology that could cause overall harm, including weapons, and surveillance. So it's concerning that the big AI companies, OpenAI and now Google, are removing these pledges that they made, not to use this technology for military purposes. And Brett gets into these reports in this, the reports from 972 magazine about how Israel uses AI to kill people in Gaza, to identify targets and bomb them. I mean, the most horrific example of it was the one that they called "Where's Daddy," which, this report detailed how they would wait for a Hamas guy. And these were like lower level guys they're talking about, to get back to his house, to bomb them, to get back to his house where his wife and kids are. And, many of them live in big residential buildings where there's a whole bunch of other families, children. And that's when they would bomb them. And they called it "Where's Daddy?" Again, like mocking the children that they're killing, or if they're killing their father. It's just absolutely horrific and barbaric. And this is what this technology is being used for. All right, so the next one here, Israel's army Jenin raid enters second month. So this article is from Al Jazeera. The Israeli army has continued with its large-scale military raid in the northern occupied West Bank city of Jenin and its refugee camp, forcing thousands to flee their homes. Wednesday marks 30 days since Israeli forces began their assault on Jenin, which then spread to other parts of the northern West Bank, including Tulkarem and its Nur Shams refugee camp. At least 26 Palestinians have been killed in Jenin since January 21st. The army has also deployed hundreds of soldiers and bulldozers that demolished houses and tore up vital infrastructure in the overcrowded camp, forcing almost all of its residents out. Mohammed al-Sabaj, the head of the Jenin Camp Services Committee, said, quote, "We don't know what's going on in the camp, but there is continuous demolition and roads being dug up," end quote. So the majority of the residents of this camp, of this area, are not there. They've been forcibly displaced. And in the meantime, Israeli bulldozers are at work destroying infrastructure. They're demolishing houses and things like that. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, Jenin Mayor Mohammed Jarar said the Israeli army adopted a pattern of random destruction in the camp and its surroundings to make the camp uninhabitable. The mass displacement of Palestinians from various parts of the West Bank in recent weeks marks the largest displacement operation in decades. The camps, built for descendants of Palestinian refugees who fled or were driven from their homes in the 1948 Nakba around the creation of Israel, have long been major centers for resistance groups fighting Israeli occupation. They have been raided repeatedly by the Israeli military, but the current operation, which began as the ceasefire was agreed in the besieged and bombarded Gaza Strip, has been on an unusually large scale. So about 17,000 people have been forced out of the Jenin refugee camp, leaving it almost deserted. In Nur Shams, 6,000 people, or about 2/3 of its population, have been forced out, with another 10,000 leaving from Tulkarem camp. All right, so the next one here, CIA expands drone flights over Mexico. So the New York Times reported on Tuesday that the CIA under the new Trump administration has expanded secret drone flights over Mexican territory to hunt for fentanyl labs. U.S. officials told the Times that the drone flights started under the Biden administration but quickly expanded once Trump came into office. Both Trump and his CIA director, John Ratcliffe, have vowed to take stronger action against Mexican cartels. Responding to the report on Wednesday, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said the flights were being conducted in coordination with her government. So Mexico is saying that they're aware of these flights and that they even, it sounds like she's saying they've requested some of them. She said, quote, "These flights are part of the collaborations that have been going on for many years between the United States government and the Mexican government. Every time it is at Mexico's request for collaboration, for information to be able to attend to security conditions," end quote. So the Times report said the CIA drones were not authorized to use force in Mexico and that U.S. officials do not envision using drones to conduct airstrikes. Bombing fentanyl labs would cause massive civilian casualties since they are often inside homes in urban areas. On top of the CIA drone flights over Mexico, the U.S. military has also stepped up its surveillance flights on the border, but the military aircraft have not entered Mexican airspace. U.S. officials told the Times that the U.S. was sharing the data from its drone flights over Mexico in hopes that Mexican authorities would disable the fentanyl labs. If the labs are not destroyed, the Trump administration may take other actions and has not ruled out the idea of special operations raids across the border, which could lead to a full-blown war with cartels that would likely include attacks on U.S. territory. I think this is one of the surest ways to bring a real deal war to U.S. soil is bombing or launching special forces missions across the border. At least for now, the good thing is that this is being done in coordination with the Mexican government, and that they're saying that these drones don't have the authorization to launch airstrikes. But I think even though there is a lot of appetite in the Republican Party for military operations in Mexico, I still think we're a long way from there. But this next story is very concerning. Elon Musk claims that cartels are now eligible for drone strikes. So on Wednesday, Elon Musk claimed that a group of gangs and cartels the State Department has designated as foreign terrorist organizations could now be targeted by U.S. drone strikes. Musk, a close advisor to President Trump, wrote on X, quote, "That means they're eligible for drone strikes," end quote. And the State Department designation applies to two gangs, MS-13 and the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, and 6 Mexican cartels. And all of these organizations operate inside the U.S. So there's some implications here. Are they talking about drone strikes in Mexico, in Venezuela, inside the U.S.? The FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organization designations, they expand sanctions on the criminal organizations, but they do not authorize the president to use military force against them. So what Musk is saying isn't true. But this move is seen as a first step toward taking military action against cartels, an idea that's supported by many Republicans, despite the risks of blowback and bringing a hot war to American soil. In 2023, House Republicans introduced a bill to authorize the use of force against cartels and other groups. And this was a very broad authorization for the use of military force, or AUMFs as they're abbreviated. It would apply to groups, quote, responsible for trafficking fentanyl or a fentanyl-related substance into the United States or carrying out other related activities that cause regional destabilization in the Western Hemisphere, end quote. So that was a bill introduced in 2023. So it's not like it was voted on. It didn't become law or anything. But it got a lot of support. It had 24 co-sponsors, and one of the co-sponsors was Mike Waltz, who was in the House at the time, and he's now Trump's national security advisor. So again, this is an idea that they've been talking about now for a while. And talking about the what does it actually authorize, like what Musk is saying, oh, they're eligible for drone strikes now. I mean, again, that's just not true. That's just a completely crazy way to think that the U.S. government could just label an organization as a terrorist organization and then you could start bombing them. Completely unconstitutional. At the same time, the way that the U.S. has waged war pretty much since World War II has been completely unconstitutional. What they use today, to justify the U.S. presence in Syria and Iraq and Somalia is the 2001 AUMF that was passed after 9/11, and they've completely abused that. And the AUMF in general is, basically bypasses the constitutional requirement for Congress to have to vote to declare war, because it gives the president the authorization to choose where to go to war. And they're very sweeping authorizations. So, this whole idea that, oh, they're terrorists, now we can bomb them. I mean, it's not true. That doesn't mean that a president isn't going to just, ignore the Constitution and bomb them. Of course, the presidents have been doing that for decades, but I think it's just a very bad attitude to have here. And Musk is, he says a lot of stuff on Twitter, on X. It's tough to know when to take him seriously, but he is very close to Trump. And so it's not good to see him favoring this idea of a drone war against the cartels. All right, so the next one here, Israeli drone kills 1 in southern Lebanon. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So Tuesday marked the end of the deadline for Israeli troops to withdraw from Lebanon, and Israeli troops are still inside Lebanese territory. And there were Israeli attacks on parts of South Lebanon that they did withdraw from. So they withdrew from like the villages but they're continuing to attack them. In the border town of Ida al-Shab, an Israeli drone attacked a vehicle, killing one person and wounding 2 others. The identities of the casualties are still not confirmed, though Israel claimed they were targeting a Hezbollah member that they saw handling weaponry. It's not clear who that was or how he was handling weaponry in a moving vehicle. Israel reported that he was killed in the strike, though there is no confirmation that was the case or who the 2 wounded people were even alleged to be. And there was another cross-border incident. The IDF reported that their troops inside Israel fired warning shots against the group of suspects in the village of Kfar Killa, which is right along the Lebanese side of the border. So still launching drone strikes and firing across the border after withdrawing from the villages and remaining in these outposts on the border. So Israel still has a presence, is still occupying parts of southern Lebanon. All right, so the next one here, panic in southwest Syria after Israeli troops raid villages. This is another one from Jason. So there has been quite a bit of disquiet in southwestern Syria after the December regime change, which was followed by a ground invasion from Israel. Israel started by seizing the demilitarized zone between Syria and the occupied Golan Heights, but has increasingly moved beyond that into the Quneitra and Dara governance. Today, the situation is growing even more complex for people living under the Israeli occupation, as IDF troops raided the villages of Abdin and Marba in the Yarmouk basin of the Dara government. Those villages are outside the demilitarized zone and not far from the Jordan border. Israeli troops reportedly captured a young man on the outskirts of Abdin and seized his cell phone. They ultimately released him after using his phone to make threatening phone calls to villagers, warning their homes would be raided if they didn't hand over any weapons that they own. To make matters worse, Israeli troops told the villagers in Marba, which is south of Abdin and right along the Syria-Jordan border, to stop all construction, work on new homes, and preserve all official documentation of their families. So that's a strange order, telling them to stop construction work on new homes. You know, this is how they occupy, how they steal land from the Palestinians, is that they never approve permits for construction, and then the Palestinians build something, and they say, oh, that's illegal, and then they knock it down. So it seems like similar tactics in this new occupation of southern Syria. And in addition to this, there were reports of Israel shelling areas of the Dara government, also in the Yarmouk basin. There were no casualties reported in the shelling, which was the first in the area in 3 months. So this is not good to see because it just seems like Israel's doing this with impunity. Doesn't seem like this is getting any attention, this Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. And of course, this is backed by the U.S. as long as the U.S. gives Israel military aid, weapons, and all this political support that it provides. All right, so the next one here, the last story, burying the CIA's Assange secrets. So this article is from Kevin Gosselin at his website, The Dissenter. So a United States judge dismissed a lawsuit pursued by 4 American attorneys and journalists who alleged that the CIA and former CIA Director Mike Pompeo spied on them while they were visiting WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange in Ecuador's London embassy. So Judge John Kodal determined, quote, the subject matter of this litigation is subject to the state secrets privilege in its entirety, end quote. So basically saying any answer to the allegations against the CIA would reveal privileged information. So just saying, this is the CIA is exempt. They have their state secrets privilege and we can't reveal this stuff. So we're going to drop the case. Few publications followed this case as closely as the Dissenter. It unfolded at the same time the U.S. government pursued the extradition of Assange, making any outcome potentially significant. On August 15th, 2022, Margaret Ratner-Kunstler, a civil rights activist and human rights attorney, and Deborah Herbeck, a media lawyer, filed their complaint. Journalist Charles Glass and former Der Spiegel reporter John Goetz also joined them as plaintiffs. The lawsuit claimed that the plaintiffs, like all visitors, were required to surrender their electronic devices to the employees of Undercover Global, a Spanish security company managed by David Morales that was hired by Ecuador to handle embassy security. They were unaware that UC Global had allegedly copied the information stored on the devices and shared the information with the CIA. Pompeo allegedly approved the copying of the visitors' passports, including pages with stamps and visas. He ensured that all computers, laptops, mobile phones, Recording devices and other electronics brought into the embassy were seized, dismantled, imaged, photographed, and digitized. That included the collection of IMEI and SIM codes from visitors' phones. Morales and UC Global were named as defendants in the lawsuit. However, due to the fact that they were not in the U.S., the claims against them were never really litigated. In December 2023, Cartel dismissed multiple claims that were filed against the CIA, but remarkably, he found that the 4 Americans who had visited Assange had grounds to sue the CIA for violating their reasonable expectation of privacy under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Soon after, the court was notified that the CIA would assert the state secrets privilege to block the lawsuit, and that is what the judge went ahead and allowed the CIA to block this lawsuit. And Bill Burns, Biden's CIA director, submitted a declaration in April 2024 that asserted serious and exceptionally grave damage to the national security of the U.S. would occur if this case proceeded, which is just complete nonsense. This would reveal that the intelligence agencies were spying on, being weaponized against Americans who were visiting Assange. And, this is something that happened under the first Trump administration. The first Trump administration was the one to indict Assange and try to get his extradition. And they also spied on him at the embassy through this private Spanish company. And then the Biden administration is the one that blocks this lawsuit from going through. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Joseph Terwilliger, Greenlandic grievances with Denmark and Trump's annexation plan. One from Ted Snyder, Trump blames Ukraine, what the New York Times gets right and wrong. One from Donald Smith, why it's crucial to expose U.S. provocations in Ukraine. One from Lori Calhoun, lethality first, humanity last. One from Eric Sammons at Crisis Magazine, Trump looks to correct disastrous 1990s mistake. So please go check all of that out. Again, this is the last show for the week. I hope everyone has a good weekend. You could always support us by liking, subscribing, commenting. I appreciate everyone who comments and engages, and everyone who watches and listens to the show. Follow us on social media. On X, you could follow my personal account there and antiwar.com, and then follow antiwar.com on Instagram and TikTok. Lots of good content over there. So that's it. I will be back in a few days with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.